As of 3 weeks ago, something that 11 million people in Britain were using is a different legal product than it was the day before. On the 15th of July 2026, Buy Now Pay Later came under the supervision of the Financial Conduct Authority. Klarna, Clearpay, PayPal and the rest now sit inside the consumer credit regime. They must run affordability checks. They must support customers in difficulty. And for the first time, if something goes wrong, you can take them to the financial ombudsman. None of that was true in June. Now, the obvious reaction is that this is straightforwardly good news, and slow in arriving. A large unregulated lending market got regulated. About time. But here is the fact that makes this worth 20 minutes. The companies being regulated welcomed it. Klarna said publicly that robust regulation strengthening consumer protections is a good thing. Zilch called it a significant moment. Clearpay said it would help create consistent standards. That is not how an industry normally responds to being brought under a regulator. And there is a second fact sitting alongside it, which almost nobody is talking about, and which I will come to. Because to understand why a company would welcome rules that cost it money, you have to understand what Buy Now Pay Later actually is. And it is not the thing almost everybody thinks it is. So let me tell you where we are going. First, what these products are and how they avoided regulation for so long. Then what changed on the 15th of July. Then who is actually paying for the product, which is the part that reframes everything. And finally what happens to the people this new rule removes from the market. Let's start with the exemption, because it is the strangest piece of legal history in this whole story. Consumer credit in Britain is governed by the Consumer Credit Act. If you lend money to a consumer, you generally need authorization, you must assess whether they can afford to repay, and you are answerable to the regulator and the ombudsman. But that act contained an exemption. Broadly, if credit was interest-free, repayable in a small number of installments over a short period, and did not carry charges, it fell outside the regime. The purpose of that exemption was mundane. It existed for things like paying a dentist in a few installments, or a golf club membership, or a school fee arrangement. Small, occasional, interest-free, and clearly not the kind of lending that needed a regulator watching it. Then a group of technology companies read that exemption and built an industry inside it. Pay in 3. Pay in 4. Interest-free, over 6 or 8 weeks, no charges to the customer. Which fits the exemption precisely, and it meant that a company could lend to millions of people, at scale, at the point of sale, without authorization, without affordability checks, and without answering to the ombudsman. That is not a loophole in the sense of something hidden or dishonest. The exemption said what it said. What nobody had anticipated was that anyone would industrialize it. And they did. Around 11 million people in Britain now use these products regularly. Research from the regulator shows usage is highest among 25 to 34-year-olds and rising in households that are financially stretched. So by 2025 you have a lending market of 11 million people, sitting almost entirely outside the rules built to protect borrowers, because of a provision designed for paying your dentist. Now, what changed on the 15th of July? The regulator published its final rules in February, in a policy statement, and set the 15th of July as what it called Regulation Day. The products were reclassified in legislation as deferred payment credit, and treated as regulated credit activity. From that day, providers must either hold full authorization or have entered a temporary permissions regime while their application is processed. Operating without either is a criminal offense. 3 things change for the customer. Affordability checks. Firms must assess whether you can actually repay before lending to you. The regulator's deputy chief executive put the principle bluntly, saying that no one should be lent to if they are unable to repay, because that could worsen their financial situation. Support in difficulty. If you fall behind, the firm has obligations toward you rather than simply pursuing the debt. And access to the financial ombudsman. If a firm treats you unfairly, there is now somewhere to go that does not involve a court. Those are real protections, and they were genuinely absent before. So why would Klarna welcome that? The easy answer is public relations, and I am sure that is part of it. But it is not the whole answer, and the whole answer tells you what this product is. Start with the obvious question. If the credit is interest-free and there are no charges to the customer, where does the money come from? Because a lending business needs revenue. Someone is funding the gap between the retailer being paid immediately and you paying over 8 weeks. That funding has a cost, and it is not being recovered from you. It is being recovered from the retailer. When a shop offers buy now pay later at the checkout, it pays the provider a fee on the transaction, a percentage of the sale, considerably higher than the fee it would pay on an ordinary card payment. The retailer accepts that because offering installments increases the proportion of visitors who complete a purchase, and increases the size of the basket when they do. So the customer of a buy now pay later company is not really the shopper. It is the shop. And what the shop is buying is you. Specifically, your increased willingness to complete a purchase you might otherwise have abandoned, and to spend more when you do. That reframing explains almost everything about how these products look and feel. It explains why it is free to you. You are not the revenue. Charging you would reduce the very behavior the retailer is paying for. It explains why it appears at the checkout rather than anywhere else. The value is generated at the exact moment of hesitation. Earlier is useless and later is too late. It explains why the application is instant and frictionless. Friction is the enemy of conversion, and the entire commercial proposition depends on the decision being easy. And it explains why, for years, nobody ran a proper affordability check. Not because anyone was reckless. Because an affordability check is friction, and friction reduces the thing the retailer is paying for. If you watch the film I made about payment protection insurance, or the one about car finance commission, this shape will be familiar. There is a visible transaction, which is you buying a jumper. And there is a second, invisible transaction running alongside it, in which somebody is paid for having produced you at that moment in that state of mind. You are not being sold a loan. You are the product being delivered to the retailer, and the loan is the mechanism of delivery. Now, hold that, because it explains the welcome. If your revenue comes from retailers rather than from customers, then regulation that improves consumer confidence in your product is not purely a cost. It is a quality upgrade to the thing you are selling to shops. A regulated, ombudsman-backed installment product is easier for a large retailer to integrate and defend than an unregulated one. Regulation also does something else that any established player understands. It raises the cost of entry. Authorization, compliance infrastructure, and affordability systems are expensive, and they are far more affordable for a company with 11 million users than for a startup trying to become one. So the largest providers welcome a rule that improves their product in the eyes of their actual customers, and makes it harder for the next Klarna to appear. That is not a conspiracy. It is what predictably happens when you regulate a mature market, and it is worth noticing every time an industry publicly supports its own regulation. And here is where the whole thing turns over. We started with a story about a gap in the rules finally being closed. 11 million people who were unprotected are now protected. And that is true. but the financial inclusion organization Fair4All Finance has projected that the stricter affordability checks could exclude up to 30% of the roughly 11 million people currently using these products. 30%, something in the region of 3 million people who currently use interest-free installments, may no longer be able to. Now think about who those people are. They are, by definition, the people who fail an affordability assessment. Which means they are the people with the least financial headroom, the thinnest credit files, the most volatile incomes. The people the regulation was designed to protect. And the assessment is correct about them. That is the uncomfortable part. If somebody cannot afford to repay, lending to them makes their situation worse, and the regulator's deputy chief executive is right about that. But the need does not disappear when the product does. The washing machine still breaks. The school shoes still do not fit. The car still fails its MOT. And the household that was spreading that cost over 6 weeks, interest-free, now cannot. So where do they go? That is the question, and I want to be honest that nobody has a confident answer, including me. Some will simply not buy the thing, which in the case of a discretionary purchase is arguably the point. Some will use a credit card, if they have one and if they can get one. Some will go to higher cost credit, which charges interest and fees precisely because it lends to people who fail other assessments. And some will end up with the kind of lending I described in the film about the poverty premium, doorstep loans, rent-to-own, subprime cards, where the cost of borrowing for an ordinary household necessity is very high indeed, and where the product is not free because there is no retailer paying for it. If you are finding this useful, that is what this channel is. Every figure from a named source, working out why things cost what they cost and who ends up paying. Subscribing is how you get the next one. So here is the tension at the center of this, and it does not resolve neatly. An affordability check is a good rule. Lending to people who cannot repay is genuinely harmful, and the evidence on that is not seriously disputed. Citizens Advice has described these products as being like quicksand, easy to slip into and difficult to get out of, and debt charities have been warning about the volume of agreements people were signing up to. But an affordability check does not create affordability. It relocates the consequence of its absence. Passing the check means you keep access to a cheap product. Failing it means you lose access to the cheap product, and retain the underlying need, and meet that need somewhere more expensive. Which means, in the specific case of the household with no savings, the rule protecting them from a free installment plan may move them toward a paid one. Now, I want to be scrupulous here, because this argument can be pushed too far and it is often used dishonestly. It is regularly deployed by high-cost lenders to resist any regulation at all, the claim being that restricting them pushes people to loan sharks. That claim is usually overstated, and the evidence after the payday lending cap did not support the more apocalyptic versions of it. Nor is buy now pay later actually free in practice for everyone who uses it. Missed payments have consequences. Multiple concurrent agreements across different providers are genuinely difficult to track, which is one of the specific harms the debt charities identified. And there is decent evidence that installment options increase spending, which means some of the demand being served is demand the product itself created. So this is not an argument that the regulation is wrong. I think on balance it is right. It is an argument about what regulation of a credit product can and cannot do. It can stop a bad transaction happening. It cannot supply the money that made the transaction necessary. And that is the thing worth taking away, because it applies far beyond this. Almost every consumer credit protection in Britain works by preventing a transaction. Cap the rate, require the check, ban the product. Each one stops a specific harmful exchange, and each one is a genuine improvement on what preceded it. But every one of those exchanges existed because somebody needed money at a moment when they did not have it. Prevent the exchange and you have addressed the terms of the borrowing. You have not addressed the gap that produced it. So the gap goes looking for another product. And the next product is found in whatever part of the market has not yet been regulated, which, for about a decade, was an exemption written for people paying their dentist in installments. That exemption is closed now. 11 million people are better protected than they were 3 weeks ago, and around 3 million of them may be about to find out what the next thing is. The bill for that arrives later, in a form nobody will attribute to a rule change in July 2026. It always does.